Good morning, folks. Welcome to what is now the fourth podcast from the safeguarding team at Basketball England. Thank you to those of you, if you are listening with us today. I'm really absolutely thrilled this morning to be talking to three guests. The first of which is Paul Stewart from the world of football. We've got Billy Beddow from the world of coaching, and we've also got Kevin Kinsella from the world of officials and referees. So, Paul, do you just want to give yourself a quick intro so people know who you are, if they don't already?
Yeah, my name's Paul Stewart. I'm a former Premiership and international footballer. I'm probably better known now for disclosing in 2016 the abuse that I suffered at the hands of a football coach in the mid-70s.
Thanks, Paul. Coming across to you, Billy. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Why should we know Billy Beddow?
So probably best known for my coaching career rather than my playing career, which is pretty accurate. I've been coaching in this country for just over 10 years now. I coach junior and senior level. So I'm currently coaching the MK Breakers and the Milton Keynes Academy here, which is a sixth form school setup. And I'm the GB under 16 assistant coach this summer as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, Billy. And finally, Kev.
Morning all, I'm Kevin Kinsella, current level 4 refereeing in Div 1 and active in the BBL.
Perfect. Thanks ever so much, folks. So today's discussion is all around what we mean by low-level concerns in the world of safeguarding. And there's another phrase that is bandied about quite a bit now, which is active bystander. So that will be the kind of overall aim of the discussion this morning. But given that we've got Paul Stewart from the world of football, and he's given a little bit of I suppose, an overview of why he's here. Paul, why is this important? Why should we talk about this? And particularly, why should we be talking about this in the world of sport and basketball? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, in any setting, really, I think it's important that the low-level concerns are reported purely and simply because it becomes too late. If we stand by and just become observers and think that we'll wait for a period of time until it develops, then it's too late for the child in particular, who may, with a low-level concern, if they're approached, disclose. But once the abuse starts, then it's far too late. And what happens then, that child will never speak up because it's gone far too far from just what people might notice. And when I talk about what they might notice, and in my case in particular, my auntie noticed that my personality had changed somewhat. She said to my parents early on, during probably the grooming process, she said to my parents that she'd noticed that I didn't speak as much as I had previously, that I don't seem to want to go out there, that I'm withdrawn. And all these are big signs that something isn't quite right in that child's life. And you've got to bear in mind, in the mid-70s, we didn't have safeguarding officers. We didn't have even a duty of care, Lois. So I can understand. And you know what it is? These people were so very manipulative and very good at sort of covering over anything and saying, making excuses for why the child was like they were. So for me, I think the most important thing is that we look at the children from the get-go if we see any changes, and these changes it might not just be in personality. We look at the use of language. If we hear that they're using language that's way beyond their years, if they're coming to our sessions with the latest designer clothing, the trainers, the tracksuits that they wouldn't ordinarily have, then for me, I think we need to explore that something might be wrong in that child's background and report it. Because, like I say, the devastation that can happen if we do not say anything further down the line is, it can ruin families. I mean, my story alone can tell you how it's devastated not just me as the victim, but how it's affected my mother and father, how it's affected my brothers. So for me, and I am an advocate of early intervention and low-level concerns, and I don't really care if they don't go anywhere. You know, that's the thing that I as long as we report it, then we know that somebody is overseeing what might be happening in that child's life.
And I think, you know, some of the key things that you've said there around obviously making sure we spot those things and we talk about them early, but actually it's the profound impact that it has throughout everybody's life, isn't it? And I think that's the thing that you've got to always have in your head, that actually, you know, it might be nothing, it might be something, nothing that goes nowhere, as you've just said. But actually you could be, and I don't think it's too far-fetched, you could be saving somebody's life, actually, couldn't you? And I think, you know, particularly in the FA scandal that came out, we know the profound impact that had on your life, but on lots of other players around you for whom...
As you quite rightly say, you know, I'm here and I'm able to tell my story. Some of my colleagues, the impact of that abuse was far too much for them to handle and took their own lives. So, you know, and again, Lois, I have to reiterate the actual damage it does to families, you know, to parents, to, as I say, siblings, but also when I look at my wife and my children, what they had to go through due to my actions simply was devastating for them through no fault of their own. So there are so many people that are affected when one individual is abused. And as you quite rightly said, you know, we can look in not just in football, but we can look in athletics, we can look in show business. These people that are abused, you know, sometimes you know the burden is so much that they say sadly take their own lives.
Yeah, it is the case. I think so. So going on from that, and you know, thinking about who might be listening as we're speaking today, and from Billy and Kevin's perspectives, I'm interested to know in the world, both from a perspective of a coach, perspective of referees, from officials. Do we think that people understand what we mean by low-level concerns? Do we think that people understand what we mean by active bystander? Billy, thoughts from the coach's perspective?
I think it probably really differs club to club, depending on structure and emphasis put on that role. I think the first thing we need to realize as coaches is it's actually a big responsibility, you know. So if you're coaching at junior level and you have a couple of practices a week and a game at the weekend, you're probably spending more time with these young people than their teachers at school. And we expect teachers to be able to do it. So we need to be able to do it ourselves as coaches. And then from my perspective, being an academy coach, we train every day. We have sessions in the morning and after school. We have games at the weekend and on a Wednesday. Or if we go away as a national team for a few weeks to a country in Europe somewhere, we're actually spending more time with the young people than their parents. And, you know, we say, oh, it's just coaching, you know, it's just teaching kids to put a ball through a hoop and score more points than any other team. But it's so much more than that. And I think that's a real positive thing, because it does give us this opportunity actually to protect these young people and to look after their welfare. But it also is a really big responsibility. So I'd say that actually probably there isn't enough kind of check-in and checkpoints with where we're at with safeguarding as a club individually. And I think that would probably help people talk about it a bit more. You know, if it wasn't a course at the start of the year, if it was hit on multiple times throughout the season, I think that the structure would be reminded a lot more.
And it's interesting that you say you've sort of referenced schools, haven't you? And actually in schools, children are educated quite routinely, you know, they're spoken to, but actually they need to be able to translate that into the world of sport and apply it in the world of sport. So it's quite interesting that you've said that. Kev, from your perspective, referees, officials, do we think they understand what we mean by that terminology? Are they open to it, do you think?
I think it comes down to experience. I think it comes down to that person's job almost, and how long they've been in the game, but not also that, but also their age. We've got such a range of officials in terms of we've got 16 and 17-year-olds all the way up to 50 and 60, and so it's where they fit in that spectrum effectively, and whether they're willing to challenge and whether they're willing to ask questions and whether they have the confidence to be able to do that. Some do, some don't. Some see it, some don't see it as their job, unfortunately. And even to the point when B brought in the need for DBSs and safeguarding training, some were pushing back against that. And it was very much, well, that's not our job. We don't need to do that. Well, actually, safeguarding is everyone's job. And so I think it's changing the mindset of certain people and changing the mindset. And it's very similar to what Billy said. It's different between different regions and different referees and different individuals. So it's just keeping it at the forefront of everyone's thinking, and making sure that if questions need to be asked, they are asked.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It's everyone's job is safeguarding. It's not about picking out individuals, is it, or certain situations. It's about asking the questions, and as has been previously said, that could open the door to a major disclosure, or it could be nothing. But if you don't ask the question, you don't know.
And I think the trick to this is, because the next question I wanted to, and I'll just give you all 30 seconds or so to think about it, is what are the barriers to becoming what we term as an active bystander? And anybody can be a bystander and just look at a situation and kind of almost it enters your head and you're thinking, but you're really engaging that situation. But what we're actually asking people to do is become an active bystander and really engage with what they're seeing and look at it and question it in their own mind and say, is what I'm seeing okay? That's the additional bit about becoming active in that situation. And a lot of the time, things that we notice will be, they will be absolutely fine, but there will be occasions where you might look at a situation and something just doesn't quite feel right. It just doesn't quite seem right. And Paul, you touched on it right at the start, didn't you, about not worrying about if you say something that's not going to go anywhere, because actually the flip side of that situation is if you don't say anything and something is happening that we really don't want to happen, the impact of that long term is massively profound. And when I look at you today, Paul, I think, gosh, if only somebody had been that active bystander for you and the many other boys that were abused in that particular sport, it would have made a huge difference to all of your lives. So it's really about becoming active in that situation.
I think, there was a couple of occasions that I think today would have been picked up on. The first one being what I said about my auntie noticing the change in my personality, but then a host family that I stayed with in America wrote to my parents, and they wrote a simple line, which was, "We think you should keep your eye on the coach that was abusing me," but they didn't really embellish on it. And the problem you had was that the coach was able then to convince my parents that they didn't know what they were talking about. Now, I think if we'd had a welfare officer or even duty of care, they may well have looked at it, because I was with him 24/7, Lois, which when you look at it now, if it's not a family member, there's got to be something wrong. But I just on a couple of things, what we talk about as active bystanders, I think the challenges are, and you will always get the challenge of somebody doesn't want to be seen to be telling on a close friend or telling on a coach, and that might be because they don't want their child's chances of progressing to be any less. So the challenges that you have are, it's that grassing culture in a way where you're worried about falling out with somebody, even though you notice that what is happening isn't quite right. And it's also difficult, Lois, because I think you said it perfectly when you talked about if we think something is wrong, if we have a gut feeling that something isn't quite right, it probably isn't, and we should report it. But I always think you're going to get the challenges of, I don't want to, because as well as I do, these people that infiltrate organizations, they're not typical what we see in the press with the raincoat. They're the nicest people you'd wish to meet. Everybody trusts them. In fact, they will say, definitely not that person doing that. They will definitely not do it. And that's exactly how these people operate. So there are challenges when we're asking everybody to be involved. But I would always revert back to, we're talking about children here and ruining lives. So for me, that outweighs anything about saying something about a colleague, a friend, a coach, because we're talking about that child's life. And the actual destruction that can happen if we don't do anything.
Yeah. And in terms of, I don't know whether Billy or Kev, whether or not you've got any thoughts on the barriers, particularly in the world of basketball, whether there's anything that you think that is, more specific to our sport in terms of why people might find it challenging or have barriers that they perceive are there in terms of thinking about low level concerns. Thoughts?
From an official's point of view, and basketball is a really small community. So like Paul already said, it's almost that, well, I don't want to grass on a friend, or I don't want to grass on someone that I know. And so many, from an official's point of view, especially at the junior level, so many officials are linked to clubs.
Yeah.
Whether that's a table official, whether that's a referee, but they probably know the coach really well and think, well, that's actually nothing. They might be a family friend. It might be actually a member of the family.
Yeah.
As we see in a lot of clubs, especially the smaller clubs, they're all run, and officials are all a very similar family. So I think Paul's hit the nail on the head in terms of a lot of it, is that it's having that confidence and having that ability to then go, well, actually, I'm not happy about this. And you don't mind the fact that actually they're a close friend or whoever they might be. And then on the other side of that, I think it's, like I already mentioned, it's down to experience. As a level 4 official and someone that's been in teaching for 15 years nearly, I would have no bones about questioning a coach or a parent at the side of a court if need be, or referring that to whoever it needs to be referred to. Could I say that about?
Do you think that's easy for you, Kev, though, because you are an official? I mean, the job that you particularly do is you're refereeing two sides, for instance. So for you to actually spot something and say something, it's your human nature because of the actual what you actively do within basketball. Or do you think if you weren't a referee, you would still have the confidence to say something about a colleague, a friend, a coach, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, it does make sense. I think from a personal point of view, because my work outside of basketball is linked to safeguarding. So I would have no bones about questioning anyone, but I couldn't say the same about some of my other officials, even those that are level 4. I don't think some of them would have the confidence to say, well, actually, I'm not happy about this. But from an official's point of view, I also think that some officials are there literally just to referee a game, and will almost, I wouldn't say turn a blind eye, because that's the wrong phrase, but if it doesn't happen on the court and there isn't a foul to call or isn't a violation to call, then it isn't their issue to deal with. I think that's some of the, and it's something you mentioned previously, Paul, about that ability to question things. Well, actually, as a referee, especially 10, 15 years ago, it's not my job to do that. It's not my job to do that. My job's to call the game. And I still think a number of officials are still in that mindset, and it's changing that mindset to, well, actually, the game is secondary to the welfare of the children. That has to be the first point of call. Never mind whether you call a travel or whether you call a foul or everything else or whatever it might be. The game's secondary. The first thing that we need to look after is the welfare of the children.
Yeah. Billy, from a coaching perspective?
I think it's similar to what Kev just said. There's some tangible things, there's some intangible things that are maybe the barriers. So tangibly, like basketball is one of the quickest growing sports in this country. There's clubs popping up everywhere, and they're clubs mainly run by volunteers. It's not these people's jobs. So they maybe think their first kind of priority is setting up another session for under 10s and then entering the National League, and then who's going to referee and who's going to run the table and all of those kind of things. Well, actually, what Kev said is the first priority is to make sure you have a robust safeguarding policy and someone who is in charge of that as well. I think, do clubs understand how the whistleblowing policy works and what the duty of care is and those kind of things? I think those tangibles need to be set up before you worry about how many championships you've won and how many kids you've got playing and those kind of things. And then specifically for coaching, to be honest, there's that cultural thing of he's a tough coach, she's a tough coach, or she's a player's first coach. It's the way that they coach. And I think when you've coached for a while and you have some experience, you understand that any coach who says they're a tough coach will have no problem explaining the methodology and why they coach in that way. And actually asking those questions is just asking a coach to explain why they do what they do. And there's no problem with that at all. You know, same way we can say, I use this drill to teach this, I use this style to make sure my players behave in this way. And I think that not
But
enough.
do you not think it would be challenged though, Billy? Do you not think that would be challenged purely and simply because when just going on the tough coach scenario, do you think a parent would feel that they could challenge that because of the way that the coaches are? Would they not possibly think, well, I better not say anything because my child might be the child that's left out and not selected when you're talking about that methodology of coaching? That would be what I would first think, that a parent would think, well, I better not broach anything here because he is, you know, classed as a tough coach and his methods are tough and his methodology is tough. So I'm a bit worried about challenging in case it affects my child's chances of progressing.
Yeah, and I think the personality of some coaches as well is to be standoff from parents and, you know, avoid those conversations as well. So it's a huge barrier. I think clubs have to see that though and recognize that, okay, maybe it's not going to be the parents who bring up those concerns with the coach, but it needs to be the other coaches and the colleagues who this is, you know, our job or one of our kind of pastimes that we commit a lot of time to. And then the only other thing is ways to make it easier for the parents. So as a club, we do an anonymous feedback form for coaches at the end of the season. You know, how did you think the sessions run? What did you think of this? And it's a nicer way to invite some feedback as well. You know, that's a bit bigger scale than just seeing an incident or something like that. But, you know, there are ways, I think, to get around that awkwardness and just having a conversation, like bringing the parents in as a coach and speaking to them eye to eye can have that impact as well.
And I think it's really interesting that, you know, when you compare the world of education and you compare the world of sport, and I think exactly what you've both said actually is that there is a reluctance quite often from parents and players to challenge coaches because they feel it has an impact on their progress. Whereas most parents and children do now understand that when they go to school, for example, there's an expectation that they will be safe, that teachers will, you know, be respectful to their children and treat them in a way that is fair and that isn't abusive. And I think the challenge is to make sure that we can transfer that across to other sectors without it feeling awkward or like we can't have the conversation. Just to keep this moving, I guess then, and I suppose we're almost summing it up ourselves in terms of, you know, what should parents, what should players, what should children, what should anybody expect? I know what that looks like, and for me, it's about, you know, there should be an absolute basic expectation. And Billy, you've said it in terms of some of the tangible things. There should be a safeguarding policy. There should be a welfare officer. I think every player and every parent has a right to expect the absolute highest standard when it comes to safeguarding. And that should be the first thought rather than sometimes the second, third or fourth or even the sixth or seventh thought, really, which I think people kind of sometimes see it. And particularly for those of you that might be listening, you know, if you are the parent that's been, come on, be the club welfare officer, or come on, you know, we need somebody to put the name down. And that's a challenge because you might not have any experience, you might not have any idea of, you know, what safeguarding and child protection looks like. So that is a real challenge. But I think it's asking those people as well, isn't it, not to be afraid to ask questions and come to the governing body, come to the clubs, you know, talk to other welfare officers maybe in the local community about what that looks like, because I know and we know that for some of those smaller clubs, that's exactly what happens, that because we're small, we're grabbing the first person and sort of it's a bit of arm twisting. Come on, please.
I think that happens in football as well.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, the parent that's there the most, the one that's helping out the most, right, gets sometimes bullied into doing the welfare officer job when, as you rightly said, they're not experienced, Lois, but because they're there all the time, somebody almost bullies them into that position that they don't want. So, you know, I know you're talking about two different sports, but I hear about it and see it happening in football. And going back to and this is a massive club. I was at a massive club a few months ago whereby the coaches from the academy wouldn't allow the safeguarding officer into the academy under any circumstances. Now, we look at football coming leaps and bounds, and still we've got these challenges whereby coaches feel that in some areas that safeguarding officers are just going to bring in rules and regulations that are about to stop them from doing their job. And they do not realise that safeguarding is to protect them as well. It's to protect the coach as well. It's not just for the children.
Absolutely.
We know ultimately it is, but there are scenarios where coaches can fall foul of taking children on their own, coaching them on their own, and then something being said. So, you know, I think there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of how we address what safeguarding is. Kev was 1,000,000% right for me. You know, we just, first of all, we think of them as children. Then we move on to the basketball side or the football side. But let's think of their well-being as children first and foremost. Are they in an environment where they can, or they feel safe and they can speak up, which I think is great from what Billy said, you know, with the feedback forms, even if they're anonymous, at least they're getting something back from the people that are involved. But more, hopefully, moreover, the children are filling them forms in as well. And then you can pick the patterns out of what them children are saying, coach by coach, club by club.
Yeah. So if I was to ask you all, if I was asked to ask you all for one thing, and you know, considering, you know, we'll have a huge variety of people that will listen to our discussion today in terms of, you know, it might be parents, it'll be coaches, officials, referees, small clubs, big clubs, players, you know, across that spectrum. You know, if we ask them all to do one thing, maybe slightly differently, you know, what would that be? Who wants to go first? Rather than picking on somebody, who wants to
I'll go first.
Go on then.
It's having the confidence to question why, and it's having that thought process. When I deliver safeguarding training, it's I always go along the lines of asking the question, could this happen here? And the answer is yes. So therefore, ask why things are happening. Ask why that coach is taking the same person home. Ask why the child is arriving from home with saying they're not eating for 24 hours or however long it might be. Ask the question why, and don't think, well, actually, it's this person, it can't happen, because it can. And as Paul rightly said, the people that commit these heinous crimes are very good at pulling the wool over the eyes of the parents or the other coaches or the other adults in the room. They're exceedingly good at it. So we need to ask the question why, and then follow through with your gut instinct, because generally 99% of the time your gut instinct is probably right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's just having the confidence to question that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Kev. Billy, thoughts? One thing, what would it be?
I think ask yourself the question, does everyone involved in your club and all the stakeholders understand how to report an incident or a concern, and what that process looks like? If the answer is yes, brilliant, keep going. If the answer is maybe or no, then you need to make that process possible and evident.
Yeah, and accessible, I think, is the other bit of that, isn't it? Make sure it's accessible to everybody, because everybody's, you know, mechanisms or choices in terms of who they want to speak to and how they want to do that will be wildly different. So it's accessibility as well, isn't it? Paul, one thing that you would let's flip the question, Paul, slightly for you. If speaking to the world of basketball and to our basketball community, what would you ask them to do? One thing, what would you ask them to do?
Do you know, first and foremost, I agree with both what Billy and Kevin said, but for me, it's the child's voice. Really is the child's voice, and for me, I would make sure that we had some way in which the children can always, whether that's a committee that you have of children, you know, because we always look at the committees and they tend to be the adults, but I think, you know, the children are the ones that are participating most in it. So what do they want? How do you see it? And what do you want? And what would make it more enjoyable for you, rather than us being the ones to telling them that what they've got to do. You know what I mean? So for me, whilst I agree 1,000,000% with Billy and Kevin, I think they're great points. Mine would be on, you know, supporting both of them points, but also give that children the voice, because You know, they're the most important people in this. We're there to hopefully support them, hopefully give them the best experience that we can. But if we don't listen to them when we don't know whether they're having that best experience, I think, Lois.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I think, you know, just to kind of summarize and close, really, you know, what we're asking you guys that listening out there to do is we're asking you to look and think about what low level concerns, you know, are and what they look like. And, you know, you've had a couple of examples, you know, is the coach or whoever the adult in the room is, are they always taking that one child home in the car on their own? Are the coaching practices that are going on, you know, one-to-one that we're not quite picking up? And is there something happening courtside that, you know, as referees and officials we can look at and go, you know, do you know what, that just doesn't look quite right? Are the things where children are coming from, you know, coming to us from their home environments that we're picking up on, thinking, do you know what, there's something not quite right with, you know, whoever it is this week, and we need to kind of pick up on that situation. So we need to, you know, we need to remember that it's not just about picking up at what's happening in training with coaches and officials, but actually for some of these children, some of these things are happening outside of the world of sport, and we need to be kind of observant and vigilant to those things that might be happening to children. And, you know, like we've all said today, it's not being afraid to speak out. I would remind, you know, the audience that are listening today that, you know, you have got roots via to Basketball England. You've got roots via the website. You've got roots via the safeguarding team here at Basketball England. You know, there are people at the end of a phone, on the end of an email, on the end of the report it section on the website. So please, 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 you know, if that's the right mechanism for you, use it. But use your club welfare officers in your clubs, use your coaches, use your trusted adults that you can go and speak to, and just don't be afraid to speak out. I'm going to leave just, you know, a closing kind of couple of sentences, Paul. You know, you are the person sat here today that for whom abuse has impacted their life unbelievably profoundly, and you know, I feel privileged that I've had the opportunity to come and listen to you speak in person, and you know, hear firsthand the impact that that's had on you. So, you know, closing sentences to the world of basketball, I think probably should go to you this morning.
I think to the world of basketball, you know, we must, you know, be clear that most of the people, you look at Kevin, you look at Billy that are on this podcast today, 99.9% are doing it because they're doing it for the right reasons, because they want to make sure that the children enjoy the experience, that they develop these youngsters into adults as they go along. So we must and say to the audience that we know 99.9% of you are doing it for the right reasons and for the children, but we have to not be complacent. We have to make sure that we constantly evolve, whereas safeguarding goes, because the game evolves. The way and the manner in which these people try to access our children is changing, and has changed over the years. So we always need to be mindful of that. But I think that what you're doing, Lois, by putting these podcasts on, getting the people in that you've got in that are at the front end, can only reiterate how well England basketball are doing in terms of trying to strive to be better in terms of safeguarding, and just understand that, you know, these children are the most precious things we've got. So we need to make sure that we do everything in our power to give them the best experience we can within our sports.
Perfect. Thanks very much. Thanks all for joining me this morning. Your time is hugely, hugely appreciated. Thank you very much.